Civilizing America, a user's guide from the ground up, Chapter 4. Understand action. A group's attitude guides its choice of actions and reasons for them. We connect with others, deepen personal bonds, begin group formation, and next want to understand how to focus action. Even a bonded group may have little effect on society unless its effort is well designed. Its most pervasive threat is quite simple: entropy, the tendency of ordered things to return to disorder. Earth erodes, structures cave in, paint peels, and concrete spalls. Human circumstances left to themselves deteriorate, so that we must manage them deliberately. Stated differently, nothing happens without first being made necessary. We apply influences substantial enough to obtain the outcome we want, and do not count on luck, coincidence, nor occasional inspirational leaders. We cause the objectives we seek, or entropy steadily returns us to chaos. The means we use to manage our world may be obscure because we have long relied on a mistake, assuming someone else was handling the big issues has opened us to great damage. Having trusted generations of leaders, we now kill off life forms so fast that our era is becoming the sixth great extinction of life in the planet's history. Economic inequality grows. Racism, intergroup hostility, and fear of foreigners threatens social bonds. Pollution kills more people and alters the climate, and democracies turn into autocracies outside our borders. Decades of trusted leaders have let conditions deteriorate. Big mistakes worsen even though we vote changes in leadership and political parties, inviting us to re-examine our basic assumptions. What do we say about this? Passing new laws here and there, and a turnover of political parties may not suffice, because those means so far have not. We apparently adopt a scope of action that impedes significant change. And though we anxiously look forward to what new leaders promise to do, we also know that even attractive candidates can have poor judgment and harbor destructive beliefs, and the surrendering to them can take us downhill. Many problems have obvious features to address, but even unobtrusive qualities can affect entire systems. Imagine the impact on a community from a seemingly small thing that its high school graduates value getting ahead myself over everyone succeeding. They learn as a group to value self-interest over fairness. Though our personal lives depend largely on our constructive self-help, balance is the issue. A whole exists for which we share responsibility. Concern only for ourselves translates into ease of waste, pollution, and discrimination. Advancing our own future at cost to the planet causes short-term gain and long-term loss. Holding profits above social responsibility, a commercial sector oppresses workers in compensation, social services, safety, justice, and consumer protection. Dominant influences may casually support a polluted environment, an unfair economic system, and gain for a few through generational debt inflicted on many. Self-defeating, short-sighted, selfish values have predictable results. Political parties thus far have appeared unable to manage such conditions, and first must decide if they want to. Do they believe in a fair society with a place for all? Higher values should restrain lower impulses. The brutal truth is that people we have trusted to lead have failed us, and our personal assumption that we could dismiss such concerns also failed us, and the world suffers the consequences. Our nation's founders tried to avert these problems, but too much to come was unknown. To them, representative government seemed right for a society dependent on face-to-face interactions. Office holders would return home to be accosted by their peers and be held accountable. But now, gated communities and money-driven technology for mass deception have let representatives act with impunity against the interests of their constituents and the good of the whole. Limitations. In sum, we have collective limitations, and even facing them can be hard to do. We do not enjoy focusing on them and would rather be positive. But think while you read this. You want to know how to change the world and face a learning curve. Just now, you do not know how to do it, right? I mean, face it. That's why you read, listen to this book. You don't know, which is part of a broader problem. Any human's thought is but a speck of reality, like dust in a windstorm. Ideas vital to a changing society are not among our habitual concerns. How to use our influence to benefit society, develop group momentum, and help others change what they do. That we have allowed society to generate problems that now escape our management can only mean that the efforts of all of us together have been insufficient. Yours and mine included. Because we have long presumed that we know how society operates and have vented our opinions for years as though we knew what we were talking about. We can fail to recognize that we do not know how critical change takes place. This is an unhappy fact. Any of us may become defensive when others point out our inadequacies, but the issue is not personal. It is rather like not knowing how our car's engine works. If it sputters and stops, we call a tow truck or ring our neighbor who does know. Acknowledging ignorance is the beginning of knowledge. Check if this perspective applies to you. I am narrow, immersed in my personal history and problems. My ideas do not make me a force for peace or justice in the world, or rescue it from pollution. To expand my limited powers, I need to join with others who share my values and learn together. I know that working alone at the tasks before me will not meet the needs of the world, and I must gather strength from numbers and from knowing more. If we tend to blame someone else, we are on the wrong track. Regardless of others' behavior, we first manage ourselves. We might assume that because the outer world hinders or annoys us, we should have bad feelings about it and focus on its flaws. We think how perfect everything would be if other humans were not so imperfect. Yet, perfecting means beginning with conditions uncreated, unbuilt, and undeveloped. In a word, imperfect. Someone got here before us and did it wrong, we think. So here we are, materials lying all about us. We put them in place by consciously altering negative conditions, and to do that must know more. The effort that moves us past our ineffective thinking is minimal, but it is effort. A sign on the fence at its boundary would read, "Don't go here." Beyond the fence is something we have alienated, declared alien to ourselves, due to its effort, complexity, risk, discomfort, etc. Moving our boundary to grasp it requires determination, often in a sequence that has happened to me on scores of occasions. I recognize a task that appears distasteful and notice I do not want to do it. A thought occurs to me that it is a good idea to do it. Either someone else expects me to, I need to, or I know I should. Opposing thoughts compete in my mind while I continue to feel resistant. Time passes, a day or week or more, while I am pulled by the two tendencies. If I can find an excuse to avoid doing it, I may dismiss it entirely and return to it only if pressure from events or other people reaches me. I identify resistive feelings like fear or laziness and try to think past them. Once deciding that it is something I ultimately want to do or must do, I condition myself to do it. Knowing I will eventually do it steadily reduces my resistance. More time passes in this state as I envision the steps of the task, become comfortable with them, and think how happy I will be when they are done. When the task is confusing, hard, or unfamiliar, I commit to a few minutes a day of doing the simplest, easiest steps toward it. These steps coalesce eventually into the realization I can do it now and feel good about it. Resistance lifts. Carrying out the steps then feels correct and appropriate, and the completed task satisfying, however small the issue. Many probably endure something similar because purposes inherently compete. The traditional Eastern idea, our superiors must govern our inferiors, describes a conscious process of the former gradually directing the latter. If we avoid that effort, we are simply weaker, less able to move past our habitual boundaries. Action for the whole. We tend to confine ourselves within niches. You may be effective in one, administering this or that, making things others use, protecting various values, or serving needs. It's all good. But remember the Titanic. It might have sunk a dozen ways, and responsible people may have prevented them all, but it still hit the iceberg. The stewards, engineers, and navigators doing their job did not matter ultimately. Thinking must be broad, yet detailed, systemic, yet part by part, and needed among more than just a few in Washington, since even vast systems can depend on specifics. One gripping the smallest thing, a germ no less, may save civilization. Between 40 and 100 million died from Spanish flu, 1917 to 1920. And while small systems may creep along, if the big ones are not managed, the whole thing sinks together, as occurred with 26 civilizations of the past, where probably most people were doing their part. We weave individual actions together to achieve a scope of accomplishment, but not all at once. Our efforts stretch across time. The main effect of our early ones is on ourselves. Acting on an idea, we assimilate it differently than we would just thinking about it, so that our first activities, in a sense, are a lead line. A crew docking a large ship will throw a light rope to longshoremen, who use it to pull a heavy hawser from the boat that they secure to a cleat on the dock. Our initial action matters more for the lasting effort it draws behind it. As we continue our efforts, we develop reserves that color the quality of our activity. Fatalism and hope. Counting too much on explicit objectives, however, we may be tempted to complacency and vague hope. Maybe the climate will reverse itself spontaneously. Maybe open water in the Arctic will generate a new ice age and polar bears and city waterfronts will survive. Maybe dictators around the world will take better care of their people. Oligarchs running the U.S. financial system will decide to care for the poor. And bigots and racists will have a change of heart. Maybe. But the optimism of some can run aground on the willfulness of others to do damage. In the movie Thelma and Louise, the two flee toward the edge of the Grand Canyon. Does one say to the other, "There's a cliff ahead, let's slow down"? Before impending disaster, most people apply brakes. But the two look at each other, laugh, accelerate, and drive over the cliff, which seems to be the attitude of some guiding society. Living in their own imaginary world, they welcome chaos and dismiss others' fate. Public officials who harm society, however, are a distraction from our purpose. Though containing their influence, we need to instill higher qualities in society with effort lasting decades instead of occurring in spasms or aimed at individuals. Demonstrations for stricter gun controls and education in 2017 and 2018 drew brief public attention, but we look for their eventual influence from numbers continuing to campaign and run for office in coming years. But even thinking of this as, quote, working till we achieve our goal, unquote, is off target. A young couple's goal may be to get married, but their effort does not stop then. And wanting to have children, they do not then rest from their labor. Instead, achieving objectives opens us to a field of development from which we create the next field, Continuity of purpose is the artery of this growth. Quitting too soon. Maybe we were burnt out by tensions or did not know how to work together, master responsibility, or care enough. Noticing limited dedication in others, we examine ourselves. People catch it from those they respect, so that first we face our own, and then how we invite others to join us. When they notice how a committed person thinks, feels, and acts, they realize they can do it too. Discussions about action. Group activity is more effective when people think similarly about what they do. We may not even realize we view a task differently until a problem erupts, but we can head off many by discussing issues that align us with our common intent. The problems we want to solve are significant versus they don't matter. We are personally connected to them versus they belong to someone else. Collaboration is possible versus it is extremely hard. Cooperation is not dangerous versus it sucks us in. Strangers will not infect us versus new people have weird ideas. Evil and error can be contained versus we are helpless facing them. Differing views and continual compromise are likely versus we insist on our own points. People want realistic, above-board communication versus motives are always hidden. There are serious needs to address versus needs do not exist and everything is okay. Moderate solutions can meet needs versus needs worsen till breakdown occurs. We also want to understand and apply characteristics of social behavior that relate to our purpose. Small group discussion is probably the best vehicle for assimilating them. World needs call for drastic action. This watershed belief moves us to counteract destructive trends. Climate change, death-dealing pollution, overfishing, deforestation, economic inequality, racism, authoritarianism, and ignorance demand long-term effort. The powerful few have not generated benefits for all. People are the basic resource. Political campaigns depend on people. We draw on their commitment and develop their capacities. Foster inclusion. People can accept differences in culture, race, religion, and nationality while affirming shared values. The more people vary, the more we attend to including them. Uncertainty returns people to their primary group. We survive among family, friends, and acquaintances. Effort bears fruit as individuals become allies. Work with a group. Individuals acting alone or in their occupation cannot respond to the scope of world or even neighborhood needs. Local groups are the basis even of an international network. Communicate the ideas of the group. Once people know and can express their purpose, they tend to want to share it. Give energy to ideas. People respond to ideas that have conviction and urgency. They catch interest from others. Plan for group action and group life. Action accomplishes a purpose, but the group's internal life sustains it. Planning balances aspects. Refine group interactions. Negotiating groups might pick members from the other group to represent it. Committed people tend to be poor negotiators because commitment limits adaptability. Focus long term. Too much must be done too urgently to take patient years developing an identical worldview. We address the current stage of any problem while aiming for distant outcomes. Equalize influence with loose-knit structure. Dispersed power centers can adopt a common general direction. Diverse interests prevent a single agenda from dominating. Leaders help others meet their needs. Leaders have little authority but affect others by the quality of their ideas, example, and initiative. Coordinate numbers. Local groups should be small enough that people can know each other, but large enough to undertake challenges, suggesting numbers between 20 and 150. Groups can coordinate for large projects. Coordinate dispersed activity. Those separated by distance can still act in common by exerting more self-reliance, initiative, and communication. We form temporary alliances for their interests, ours, and mutual values. Groups diverge unless linked by common intangibles. Grow in competence. People become more competent by gathering information and acting on it. Learning prepares them for action. Minimize destructiveness. We limit destructiveness by removing toxic leaders from office and preventing an elite from diverting public resources for their own benefit. Distinguish assertions from reality. People undermine effort when they misrepresent reality. We examine political advertising, speeches, and information for their motivations and call out those who mislead. Unite around a vision. Large numbers need a common picture incorporating personal, neighborhood, local, regional, national, and global influences on critical problems. Express deeper values. People want clear ideas, trust in their co-workers, and love for their vision. Values grow as people experience them in their group. Follow our founders. Our founders' vision presents unifying values and purposes we can apply at all levels of government. Demonstrate values by sacrifice. We tend to believe that cost equals worth. Suicide bombers die for their belief in a greater cause. Americans who fought in World War II have been called the greatest generation because they paid the maximum for a supreme value. Sources of change. We should not expect change from sources that have never delivered it. Formal legislative processes, for instance, have been insufficient. With government as usual, what could go wrong has been going wrong. Values expressed at the top fail to trickle down to people's lives. Education cannot resolve social needs. Harmful trends continue as though on tracks independent of it, and its content usually reflects rather than leads local attitudes. Missing, for example, has been an assessment of the causes of social dysfunction in high school language. The means and motives of those damaging to society are left unexamined for parallels today. Students need practice recognizing disintegration in their own milieu, and teachers need protection to present this learning. Peril to society should take priority over political differences. The media are unlikely to lead change because they transmit the eddies and variants of others' experience. Spin and distortion let people confirm their own prejudices so that millions never hear what others know, and the scope of information is daunting. Few items become presumptively important enough to act upon. Sensation overwhelms substance, and unverified assertions generate uncertainty about who to believe. We cannot rely even on massive expressions of public opinion. By world reports, 36 million people protested the U.S. launching the Second Iraq War, and the U.S. ignored them. 90% plus public support for background checks on gun purchases has failed to generate congressional action. The benevolence of the powerful is also insufficient. Greta Christina points out that fiscal conservatives deceive themselves, claiming social liberalism, while ignoring how civility can mask cruelty. An attitude of, I don't care what you do if it doesn't cost me anything, begets tight-fisted laws that perpetuate a devastating cycle of poverty, domestic violence, workplace harassment, and control of the political process, while disenfranchising the poor. Policing may turn more racist. Drug and prison policies create a permanent underclass, and the wealthy profit through privatized prisons. Deregulation can make things easier for businesses and harder for customers and workers. And so-called free trade can enable corporations to profit off the cheapest labor worldwide. Every fiscal policy has a social impact. To transmit values along a pipeline, we check it for leaks along the way, but someone needs to walk the pipeline and watch for them. Interconnecting conditions. 4 facts help explain our outcomes. 1. We shape our world. As we do what is in us, our actions form our world. Without effort to manage it, our society dissolves. 2. We act from our traits, our ingrained habits, values, and capacities, but are not confined to their present limitations because 3. Our traits change by how we encourage, teach, and challenge each other. This means that 4. Our treatment of each other shapes our world. Influences elicit traits. Traits shape action, and action shapes world. Because traits form outside the political process, many goals rely on extra-political thoroughness, such as in a group life that sustains learning and action. The ordinary work of civilization is expressing a value from its first conception to its last application. Effort and ingenuity manifest what was in mind, or else chaos intrudes. Lesser motives engage, and applied to the careful construction of rational thought, they break down what was built. Integration matters, parts carrying out the intent of the whole, which we observe vividly in technology. But ignoring its true impact, we burden Earth and atmosphere with particulates and carbon dioxide. Climate changes and civilization is threatened. In the soft tissues of social activity, parts are reasons, actions, values, a common vision, and practices expressing the group's purposes. Organizing draws this whole together. The world depends on people balancing among many values with solutions that work for all, benefiting themselves, but also accepting that if their actions threaten the whole, others must limit them. We want a steady flow of accurate information that tells us when we are wrong and should change our minds, a self-correcting view of our world, both local and larger, so that we can become a movement that is local, regional, national, and international, loosely organized, but netted together by multi-layered communication, pragmatically focused on solving problems by the best long-term means available, while relinquishing ideological, polarizing, and self-interested solutions, and pooling energy and idealism to create good agreements. Role of imagination. Imagination presents alternatives. What could be, couldn't be, or will be, but is only loosely affiliated with what is. Since it becomes useful by making something real, people try to close that gap in different ways. Some just declare the product of their mind real, while others employ willpower and effort. A few leaders exhibit inextinguishable confidence that they will achieve their goals and do convert imagination into reality. Julius Caesar, Charlemagne, Henry Ford, Steve Jobs, Musa Ali, and many others come to mind. But employing imagination, we narrowly skirt chasms of self-deception and exaggeration. Danger escalates when it is too far removed from reality to sustain. Hitler, for instance, or when we declare something real that cannot be. In the domino theory, imagination presumed political conditions in Southeast Asia, but caused great injury. Bigotry, racism, sexism, false entitlements, and xenophobia use imagination at least partly detached from reality, as are the defense mechanisms familiar to psychology, such as denial, projection, displacement, rationalization, and repression, all strategies for avoiding discomfort. When we apply our distortions to the world, we invite trouble. Imagination harnessed properly changes a could be to a will be, and avoids the delusion of already is. We aid achievement by converting general aims into detail-rich images of the precise circumstances we will see, touch, and feel after we have achieved our goal. Often we can proceed more directly to the picture accomplished than we had assumed. Subjective and objective. Our subjective and objective mental processes are both important tools. The former word concerns our personal take on everything and is the source of our motivation. It includes our feelings: tired, optimistic, pessimistic, frustrated, happy, discouraged, how we view things, and our assumptions about people and the world. Objective factors are independent of us, features of reality persisting whether we even notice them. Reality is the field where opinions must register creatively, so that ignoring reality guarantees they fail. To solve both mechanical and social problems, we address their real conditions. For better and worse, we are born into the first perspective. We navigate our tasks initially by how our feelings, impressions, and attachments channel our attention. We blow up some perspectives in our mind's eye, dismiss others, and personalize our views of everything. Even as adults, our reaction to most events is, how does this relate to me? We develop an idiosyncratic view of the world instead of a comprehensive one. We may turn hot about racism, for example, but not environmental degradation. About environment, but not inadequate education. Fearing foreigners, but not the loss of science. Economic inequality, but not gun control. The next election, but not future ones. Focusing narrowly on one concern, we can ignore many circumstances affecting our life. To cross this treacherous ground, we release the distortions of subjectivity while retaining its energy and draw on ourselves impersonally to relate to the real world. An experience comes to mind. As a school counselor, I occasionally accompanied busloads of students and staff on field trips. On one of them, unexpected events created turmoil among the staff and students. And after a time, another staff person approached me and said, "How can you be so calm with all this happening?" My spontaneous answer was, "I feel I am a chess piece on someone else's chessboard." Events were beyond my control, but as the task came before me, I would do it without adding further drama. Instead of posing arbitrary assertions we must defend, we ask, what is the larger need here? And do what we can with what we have. Similarly, to assist our civilization, we do what objectively enhances it and cease consulting our passing feelings, whether we are up for it or not, prefer it or not, are satisfied or frustrated. Professionals are our model. Quote, "Someone who can do their best work even when they don't feel like it," unquote. We account for the big picture first, like generals planning D-Day in World War II. Imagine saying to the troops, "You'd like to fight the Germans, yes? Okay then. When would you like to go, and where could we drop you off?" Relying on individual preferences instead of a concerted campaign, the 200,000 invaders would have died quickly from disciplined German bullets. Objectivity, what works best, must displace how I feel about it. When we are determined instead to remain upset, we narrow our view around our personal, subjective reaction. The distinction between subjective and objective helps us understand ideology. We operate much of our lives on estimates rather than certainty. Drawing on clues, we must make guesses that resources will continue to serve us, our physical environment, material possessions, jobs, relationships, and so on. We apply such guesswork also to form an ideology from factors lacking 100% certainty. But when we rely primarily on subjective elements, such as who we like and dislike, and what we want and fear, we place the limited resources of our mind ahead of features of objective reality. The more we draw from our own mind to define our ideology, the less objective evidence we think we need, and reveal our capture by a poorly grounded ideology by using it to justify harm to another. Conditions for collaboration. We obtain outcomes with relentless effort. We want a network gluing together scattered energies. Thousands of local groups linked by their intent to solve urgent problems local to global. Groups share their findings, draw from each other's successes, act together as they can, and steadily expand the range of problems they address. Success draws interest and more success. Others notice what they achieve, their numbers expand, and a change of scope occurs. The more people involved, however, the harder it is for them to agree on common purposes when they might act selfishly. But a longer foresight horizon moderates short-term self-interest, knowing that they and their kin are part of the future. They identify better with the well-being of all and are more likely to place group purpose ahead of personal interests. They know benefits will return to them and others through their sacrifices. People collaborate better when they know how long-term costs and gains apply to them personally, that sharing information does not put them at a disadvantage and others do the same. They need to know how others will behave, that a critical portion of the group begins to cooperate, that this occurs at low cost to themselves, so they can easily act together. Cooperation tends to begin with the smallest units in a hierarchy and ascend, rather than from the top down. Diversity increases uncertainty about how others will act, making long-term change harder, though with effective communication it portends better judgments overall. Unstable conditions are not permanent, but tend to precede stable long-term solutions. Even though a group's behavior may remain the same for a long time, it can change quickly. We help each other develop skills and positive attitudes, generate groups that act with those qualities, and install the qualities in society, carving up difficulties into manageable pieces. If what we do is not working, we try something else. We accept our limitations and remedy them, act according to what enables human nature to prosper, correct faulty assumptions about the world, and steadily apply the means of change.